Bonjour à tous and welcome to another guided French listening exercise. Many of you have been asking for me to do more of these, which is great. I'm really glad you're enjoying them. And some of you have also asked me to talk about music. And so I thought I would kill two birds with one stone by combining the two. Because of course, listening to a song is very different to watching a film or listening to the radio. Now I've taken a little while to do this because I wanted to make sure that I did it right and also that I chose the right song. I needed something that was accessible and easy to understand and also something which was generally appealing. Of course, we all have different tastes in music and there will be some of you that don't like this song, but I needed to find something that would appeal to as many people as possible. And so I've chosen a funny song because who doesn't like to laugh, right? So the song that I've chosen is Je Mange by Oldelaf, who is an artist that I highly recommend to you in general. Once you've watched this video, definitely go and listen to some of his other stuff because his songs are really, really very good. I've chosen Je Mange, A, because it's funny, and B, because it really speaks to me on every level, which you'll see when we come to look at the lyrics. Before we do that though, as usual, I want to go through some of the difficulties that we can come across when listening to songs in a foreign language, because these are very different to the ones that we face when watching a film or listening to the radio. For example, we have the issue of misheard lyrics, and this is something we do even in our native language. I think we all know the example of Purple Haze, right? Does Jimi Hendrix sing, "Excuse me while I kiss the sky," or "while I kiss this guy"? Now, of course, we all know the answer, but we've all heard "this guy," right? And it's very difficult to unhear it. So listening to music in a foreign language only increases the chances of you mishearing words. Perhaps more importantly is the fact that grammar and syntax are often altered in order to make things work rhythmically and to make words rhyme. So, for example, Lily Allen sings, "It's people like you who need to get slew." Of course, this is wrong. She should say, "It's people like you that need to get slain," but that doesn't rhyme, so it doesn't work. Now, I don't know whether this is a genuine error on her part. Slay is not a word that we use very often, and it is very irregular. But whether it's deliberate or not doesn't matter. We forgive the error because it rhymes. Now, I think this is more common in English language music because English is very, very tolerant to errors, but it certainly happens in French music as well, and so we need to be careful. We don't want to be learning grammar which is either incorrect or a little bit weird in everyday speech. As is often the case, we will have colloquial language to contend with. Of course, there's no formality in a song, and we're singing about very everyday, casual things. So people are likely to be using very colloquial language that maybe you don't learn from a textbook. Unfortunately, life isn't a musical, and so we don't sing to each other when we converse, and so listening to music is not really going to help your general listening skills. You're not going to get better at listening to a conversation by listening to a song, so we need to make sure that we're listening to music for the right purposes, right? Because if you think you're going to understand conversations better by listening to music, you may be disappointed. And finally, of course, there's the fact that some songs just don't make sense, at least not to the average listener. And this can be a little bit frustrating, right? Because you might be thinking, well, I understand the words, I understand the grammar, but I don't know what's going on. This is the case for many English songs, many French songs, right? So we want to be listening to things that we understand both linguistically but also conceptually. So we're now going to move on to listening to Je Mange. It is a very easy to understand song. There's nothing too cryptic in there, so hopefully there won't be any conceptual difficulties, but we'll go through verse by verse looking at the vocabulary to clear up any linguistic issues. So here we go.
Quand je suis tout seul chez moi toute la journée, parce que j'ai un jour de libre pour me reposer, je mange, je mange.
Okay, so I said this song spoke to me, right? Straight away from the first verse, we have quand je suis tout seul chez moi toute la journée. So, quand je suis tout seul, when I am all alone, chez moi, at my house, at home, toute la journée, all day, parce que j'ai un jour de libre pour me reposer, because, j'ai, I have, un jour de libre is a free day or a day off, pour, in order to, me reposer, relax, je mange, I eat. So altogether, when I'm all alone at home all day, because I have a day off to relax, I eat. That's my life in a nutshell, right? So let's move on.
Dès que j'ai un RTT, que je sais pas quoi faire, plutôt que de m'ennuyer, j'ouvre le frigidaire, je mange.
So then we have dès que j'ai un RTT. Dès que means as soon as. J'ai, we know, is I have. And un RTT stands for réduction du temps de travail, a reduction of the time of work. So it's extra time off work, right? So dès que j'ai un RTT, as soon as I have time off work, que je sais pas quoi faire. So the que here is a repetition of the que in dès que. This is very common in French. If you start a sentence with an expression containing que and then give a list, it's very common to repeat the que. Je sais pas quoi faire, I don't know what to do. Plutôt que de m'ennuyer, rather than getting bored, j'ouvre le frigidaire, I open the fridge. So frigidaire is very much like the word refrigerator in English. It's perfectly acceptable to say it. You can say it all you like. More commonly, people will say le frigo in the same way that generally in English we say fridge. But of course, frigidaire rhymes with faire. That's why I use it. Je mange, I eat.
Mais de temps en temps, j'aimerais bien faire du sport, mais il faudrait être deux, dont moi, et du coup c'est mort. Mais je n'abandonne pas pour me dépenser. Je file à fond vers la cuisine, je prépare à manger.
Okay, so this one's a little bit longer, but nothing we can't handle. So, mais is but. De temps en temps is a very useful expression meaning from time to time. J'aimerais bien faire du sport. I would like to do some sport. So notice here the use of j'aimerais bien. This is very, very common. In English, we don't really translate the bien. I suppose you could say I would quite like to, but you don't need to translate it. It is, however, very, very common to say j'aimerais bien in French. You don't have to, you could just say j'aimerais on its own, but j'aimerais bien is a very, very common expression. So, but from time to time, I would quite like to do some sport. Mais, again, but, il faudrait être deux dans moi, et du coup c'est mort. This, I think, is the hardest line in the song to understand. So let's break it down. Il faudrait normally would be, it would be necessary to, but we're going to change that in a minute and you'll see why. Être deux literally means to be two, but être plus a number in French is usually used to indicate how many people there are, right? So if you say nous sommes trois, that means there are three of us. Ils sont 10, there are 10 of them. So, for example, if you go to a restaurant in France and you approach the waiter and say on est deux or nous sommes deux, you're saying there are two of us, we want two seats, right? So altogether, il faudrait être deux would best be translated, there would have to be two of us, dont moi, including me, et du coup, and therefore. Du coup is a very colloquial expression, basically means the same thing as donc, but it's just more casual. C'est mort. Literally, it's dead. The idea here is that he's not going to bother because of that, right? There'd have to be two of us, including me, so, not going to bother. Mais je n'abandonne pas pour me dépenser. So, mais, again, we know is but. Je n'abandonne pas is I don't give up. Pour, in order to, me dépenser, to exert myself. Dépenser on its own is to spend, right? So se dépenser is to spend your energy. So I don't give up on the idea of exerting myself. Je file à fond vers la cuisine, je prépare à manger. So filer in this case is to dash, to run very quickly. À fond is to the max, at full speed. So I run at full speed vers la cuisine, towards the kitchen. Je prépare à manger, I prepare to eat. I prepare something to eat.
Déjà à 11h30, j'ai méga la dalle. Vu mon hypoglycémie, je trouve ça normal. Je mange.
Okay, so what do we have here? We have déjà à 11h30, j'ai méga la dalle. So déjà is already. À 11h30, at 11:30, j'ai méga la dalle. I love this expression. Avoir la dalle, literally to have the slab, is to be starving. Avoir méga la dalle is to be really starving. This is a very strong way of saying it, but he's using méga here for the syllables, right? You could just say j'ai la dalle. That would be enough. That means you're very, very hungry. J'ai méga la dalle is a very intense version of that. Vu mon hypoglycémie, je trouve ça normal. So vu on its own means seen, the past participle of see. In this case though, I would translate it as given. Vu mon hypoglycémie, given my hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia being a lack of sugar in the blood. Je trouve ça normal. I find that normal, right? So already it's 11:30, I'm really hungry, but I have hypoglycemia, so that's normal. Je mange, I eat.
Quand midi arrive, que je sors juste de table, je remets vite le couvert et je passe à table. Je mange.
Okay, so here we have quand midi arrive, que je sors juste de table. Quand midi arrive, when midday arrives, que je sors juste de table, just as I am leaving the table. Je remets vite le couvert et je passe à table. So je remets is I put back or I put back on. So we have mettre to put or to put on, remettre to put back or to put back on. Vite is quickly, so je remets vite, I quickly put back. Le couvert, in this case, is the dining tablecloth. Et je passe à table. Passer à table is just to have dinner, to go to the table. We'll ignore the fact that he's rhymed table with table here. And je mange, again, I eat.
Mais de temps en temps, j'aimerais voir des amis, mais ils vont tous se moquer et me dire que j'ai grossi. Si c'est voir des gens juste pour se faire insulter, je préfère rester chez moi, je prépare à manger.
Okay, so mais de temps en temps we've already seen is but from time to time. J'aimerais voir des amis. I would like to see some friends. So here notice we're not saying j'aimerais bien, mainly because of syllables, but also because we don't have to. Mais ils vont tous se moquer et me dire que je grossis. So mais we know is but. Ils vont tous, they are all going to se moquer, to make fun, et me dire and tell me que je grossis, that I'm gaining weight, that I'm getting fat. Si c'est voir des gens juste pour se faire insulter, so this looks a little bit weird in English, literally, if it's to see people just to get insulted, right? So if I'm seeing people just to be insulted, je préfère rester chez moi, je prépare à manger. I would rather stay at home, I prepare something to eat.
Et quand vient 16h, c'est que c'est l'heure du goûter. Quand vient 17h, c'est que c'est l'heure du goûter aussi. Quand vient 18h, c'est que c'est l'heure du goûter. Quand vient 19h, là je prépare à manger.
So you'll notice this verse is very repetitive, and that's deliberate, that's why it's funny. Et quand vient 16h, and when 4 o'clock comes around, c'est que c'est l'heure du goûter. The c'est que here I would translate as that means, c'est, it is, l'heure du goûter, snack time, right? Un goûter is a snack. Goûter as a verb is to taste, but in this case we know it's a noun because he says du goûter, of the snack. Quand vient 17h, when 5 o'clock comes around, c'est que c'est l'heure du goûter aussi. That means that it's snack time as well. Quand vient 18h, c'est que c'est l'heure du goûter. When 6 o'clock comes around, that means it's snack time. And finally, quand vient 19h, là, je prépare à manger. When 7 o'clock comes around, I prepare something to eat. The la here doesn't really have any meaning. It's put there for the syllable. I suppose you could translate it as then. When 7 o'clock comes around, then I prepare something to eat. But you could quite happily take it out. It's one of those words used to add a syllable.
Quand je réalise que la bouffe est un problème, que devant la glace je ne suis plus trop le même, je bois.
So this time we have quand je réalise que la bouffe est un problème. Quand je réalise, when I realize. Now, personally, I translate realize as se rendre compte. And as far as I'm aware, this is the traditional translation. However, more and more these days, you will hear people use réaliser for realize. And I believe it is indeed an Anglicism. Traditionally, réaliser in French is to do something, to make something come about. So, for example, réaliser un rêve is to have a dream come true. Réaliser un projet is to bring a project to fruition, to make it happen, right? But as I said, nowadays people do use réaliser a lot more to mean realize. So, quand je réalise que, when I realize that, la bouffe est un problème. La bouffe is a very familiar colloquial expression for food. I suppose an equivalent in English would be grub. Est un problème is a problem. So when I realize that grub or food is becoming a problem, que devant la glace, je ne suis plus trop le même. So this que, again, is a repetition of the que we've already seen in je réalise que. So as I said before, it's like a list, right? So when I realize that food is a problem, that devant la glace, in front of the mirror, not in front of the ice cream, as you might think, je ne suis plus trop le même. So je ne suis plus, I am no longer. Trop, you might know as too or too much. Le même, the same. I might translate this as really. Trop is often used in negative expressions in French just to add a little bit extra to them. So, je ne suis plus trop le même. I'm not really the same anymore. So, for example, you could say, je ne connais pas trop cette ville. I don't really know this city too well, right? So it's something we do in English, not necessarily in this case. But, you know, too, very, really, however you want to translate that. Je bois, so we have a change now. I drink. So the whole thing, when I realize that grub is a problem, that in front of the mirror I'm not really the same anymore, I drink. And finally,
afin d'oublier que j'emplis mon estomac, parce que ma vie est un peu creuse parfois, je bois.
Okay, so afin d'oublier que j'emplis mon estomac. Afin de is in order to, and oublier is to forget. So afin d'oublier, in order to forget. Que, that, j'emplis mon estomac. So j'emplis is I fill. This is a very literary verb, emplir. Nowadays, people will say remplir for to fill. But, of course, that wouldn't work rhythmically, so he uses emplir. Just know that it's a bit weird to use it in everyday speech. Mon estomac is my stomach. Parce que ma vie est un peu creuse parfois. So, parce que, because ma vie, my life, est un peu creuse, is a bit hollow. Parfois, sometimes. Je bois, I drink. The song does then continue, but it's all instrumental, so there's no use in us going through it. So, before we finish, I have a few final pieces of advice for you when it comes to listening to music in French or indeed in any other language. First of all, listen to music in order to learn vocabulary. I've already spoken to you about some of the difficulties with grammar. In this song, in fairness, there aren't really any problems. You could say most of those things, but you do have to be careful, as I've said, particularly with certain genres like rap, hip-hop, R&B, where they really do bend the rules of the language. But that shouldn't discourage you from listening to music in order to learn a language, because there's a lot of vocabulary to be learnt. I have learnt many words in French thanks to songs, and you can do that too. So by all means, use songs to learn vocabulary, because of course it makes words easier to learn because you remember the melody and then therefore you remember the words. Do make sure though that the words that you're learning are said, right? For example, you might learn emplir from je mange, but you need to make sure that it's a word that is actually used. The good thing is that a lot of dictionaries will tell you if words are a little bit outdated. I'm fairly sure that if you look up emplir in word reference, it does say that it's a bit old, right? So do make sure that these words that you're using, as interesting as they may be, are used so that people don't look at you funny because you're using very literary vocabulary. Similarly, see if you can find some other examples of the expressions that you've learned. So, for example, in this song we learned j'ai méga la dalle, and I said that it is a very strong thing to say, right? J'ai la dalle is already sort of very, I'm starving. So j'ai méga la dalle is maybe a bit much. It's not too bad, you can say it, and I'm sure if you said it to some French people, they would be really, really impressed. But j'ai la dalle is enough. So just have a look online. I'll put some links in the description to some useful websites for looking up example sentences. I might even make videos on them so that you can see how they're used to make sure that A, you're using them in a grammatically correct way, B, you're using them in a way that native speakers use them, and C, that you know for sure that you're using it in the right context, because sometimes you can find a translation for an expression that works in that particular context, but may not always be translated in that way. So you might need to be careful just to make sure that you know exactly when to use them. So that's it for this video. Hopefully it's been some use to you. For those of you who wanted more listening exercises, I hope this is still the kind of thing you're looking for. I know music is very different to radio broadcasts, TV and films, but it is another way of listening to language. So hopefully this has been the kind of thing that you're wanting. For those of you who wanted me to talk about music, again, hopefully this is the kind of thing you were looking for. Music is a very big topic, so if you would like me to do more on it, I'm more than happy to do so. I have been toying with the idea of doing a sort of what's on my iPod, not because I think you care, but some of you might be looking for French music to listen to, but maybe aren't quite sure what there is. It took me a long time to find artists that I consistently liked. You know, the odd song here and there, but finding artists that I liked sort of entire albums of was a long process. So if you want me to do something like that, do let me know. Or if you want me to do something different, again, tell me and I will at least consider it. I take in all feedback and I'm happy to hear all of it. So yeah, as usual, let me know what you think. Now I'm starting to ramble, so I will let you go. But as usual, I have to say, à bientôt.